And why is that so important? Number one, because Jesus also gave a warning that in the last days that they'll even deny that He's coming back. And it's happening today in the church. I've been in the church all my life. I'm 56 years old. Every generation since Jesus has left thought they were the generation that would see His return. And no generation has had the privilege, and no generation could honestly declare that because of prophecies that had not been fulfilled. And today I'm going to look at prophecies, one, that have already been fulfilled, two, that are being fulfilled, and three, that will be fulfilled. Now, I started sending a text out yesterday. Most people, when you talk about prophecy, they automatically say, okay, we need to go to the book of Revelation, we need to go to the book of Daniel. Today, those are two books I'm not going to. Now, I may touch on a couple passages from Daniel, but unless the Lord leads me directly, I'm not even touch the book of Revelation. I'm not going to talk about the four horsemen of the apocalypse. That stuff's going to happen. It's true, but I'm going to talk to you about we are the generation. And why, again, is that so important? Because we are living in such an apostate time that if we don't understand this is the generation we're living, then we don't realize how great the deception is. And then furthermore, to let you know, it's okay. We should be excited. We may be the first generation of Christians that are not excited about Jesus coming back. I've even been viewing the music over the last several months, and I'm watching them sing, "This is not my home, I'm just passing through. I'm on my way to glory land." And it's all about an understanding this is temporary, but my ultimate goal is I just can't wait to get to heaven. And some people say we become so heavenly minded we're no earthly good. That's not true. Man, these that come before us have accomplished some major tasks, and we've heard so long that we are the generation to see the return of Christ that it's hard for us to believe it any longer. But I'm here to tell you, we are. Now, you can walk out of here today and say, you know what, I appreciate the pastor's sermon, but it's his opinion. Or you can leave and say, you know, this is not the pastor's opinion. This isn't even something that the Lord, and though it is showing him, but history is my witness. How are you going to argue with history? You can't do it. You can't do it unless you just want to be so blinded to the fact you can't do it. So today, I want to do that. And I'll be honest, this is not just my sermon. There are several people, and I've pulled their resources. They've done a lot of work on bringing this to the forefront, and I've brought some scripture in behind it, and then of course I've added some to it. But this is not just my thinking, because it's history in the making. And the thing about it being history in the making, you can't own the history. The history is for everyone. So I pray that by the time I finish here, that you will agree where we are, then who we are, and then hopefully with that understanding, we start having an open mind and an open heart on how God can use us into carrying forth this last day's message. Now I will tell you, you cannot study prophecy, nor can you have any inkling of an understanding if you do not look in the Middle East, in particular the Jewish people and the nation of Israel. Because the nation of Israel is not only God's chosen people, they are the prophetic time clock that everything else works off of. That's just a fact, and whether we like it or don't like it, it's a fact. So therefore, the Jewish people have to be the key focal point in dealing with Bible prophecy. In Zechariah chapter 2, verse 12, now I've got all kinds of passages. So you want them, you'll need to text me, email me or something, and I'll get them, because I've got I've got several passages to back up where I'm going. But in Zechariah chapter 2, verse 12, the Bible declares their land is holy. In Ezekiel chapter 5, the city of Jerusalem is termed the center of the nations. And in Zechariah chapter 13, the Bible makes it clear that Israel will be the object of God's wrath and His grace during the end times. You can read that in Jeremiah chapter 36 and also Zechariah chapter 13. It's there. God spoke it. People believed it. It's going to happen. Every generation thought they were the generation. But I'm telling you, we are. And I don't want to spend a lot of time there, so let's just go ahead and dive right into prophecies that have been fulfilled. Prophecies that have been fulfilled. Let me see if I can get my notes ready up here. We see, first of all, in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 64 and 65. The Bible says, "And the Lord shall scatter thee among all the people." He's talking about Israel and the Jewish people. "From one end of the earth even unto the other, and there shall they serve other gods, which neither their fathers nor their fathers have known, even the wood and stone." In verse 65. "And among these nations you will find no rest or ease. Neither shall the sole of your foot have rest, but the Lord shall give you a trembling heart, failing of eyes, and a sorrow of mind." So here the Lord was telling them through Moses, because we know this passage is in the first 5 books called the Torah or the Law. And Moses here is penning this long before Christ even comes to earth, and long before that it happens in our lifetime, but or anyway in the last 2,000 years. But he is telling the nation of Israel that I'm going to disperse you. And the reason this is going to happen is because of their rejection of Him, because they were not faithful and true. I think the book of Hosea declares Israel as a wayward wife away from God. So we see that Israel was not going to follow God, and the Lord is prophesying in particular and saying, I'm going to disperse you. In 64, He says, I'm going to scatter you among the nations because of your unfaithfulness. And that has happened without a shadow of a doubt. You can look throughout history. Actually, history will show you about 1900 years that Israel was lost and scattered. 1900 years. It's amazing to me how they could be scattered all over the world for 1900 years and maintain an identity. But that's also part of the prophecy. But the Lord not only said, I'm going to disperse you, but He said, the nations that I'm going to disperse you to, they are going to persecute you. We read in verse 65, you will find no ease, you will find no rest, you will find no peace in these areas. And the reason is because God is going to call them back. And He's going to use historical events that you and I can now look back to see how God was working. So I'm not here today. 20, 30, 40 years ago, a man or a woman could stand and speak about prophecy, and they would have to speculate because they just didn't have the full understanding. Actually, in my opinion, it would even have to go back prior to the 1940s. But even at that, they just didn't have the understanding. You're saying, was they not spiritual people? Had nothing to do with spiritual people. Again, it had everything to do with prophecy, because Daniel had told them, or the Lord told Daniel, and we can read in chapter 12, verse 4, that these last days prophecies, that knowledge would increase in the last days. By the time you get to verses 7, 8, and 9 of the last chapter of Daniel, chapter 12, he he begins to tell them, Daniel is saying, Lord, I'm seeing this, but I don't understand. And he's basically saying, Daniel, don't trouble yourself. Seal up the book. This book is not for you. This is for those that are living in the last days, where I will soon return. So it had nothing to do with the spiritual aspect of Finney and all of these people. Even before then, they just didn't have the knowledge. God hadn't granted the knowledge. And you and I, if we don't see it today, it's because we don't want to see it. And many times we don't want to see it is because we don't want to go. We don't want to go nowhere. We don't want the Lord to come back. I've not got to, listen, I've heard it. Well, I've not got to live my life yet. I'm 18 years old. I've not got to have a chance to have a family. So I finally get married and I've got kids. Well, I want the Lord to come back yet because I've not got to watch my kids grow up. And then once your kids grow up, I want the Lord to come back yet because I've not got a chance to retire and enjoy. I'm telling you, there is no vacation, no child, no anything out there is going to compare to being in the presence of God and among the holy angels, even living here on the earth during the millennium. None of that is going to compare. We need to start looking. Now, I'm not saying that we quit doing everything. I'm not telling you to go out and max your credit cards out and thinking you're not going to have to pay your debts back. You go and do that, you're going to be in trouble with God and your creditors, and your credit score is going to take a tank. You can't do that. You just can't decide you're going to cash out all your retirement because the Lord's coming back and I'm not going to worry about my retirement. No, I'm telling you, you live responsibly, but understand the day and time you're living in. Because this is not about what I can or can't do. This is about I must know the day and time I'm living and what I must do. And today, it's highly debatable in the church that we are the ones that will see Jesus return. I just came from a conference, and I loved the conference. I loved it. But one thing I kept hearing over and over is, Pastor, don't just bank everything that you're right. And I'm not going to. I'm not a narcissist. But he said, because the Lord may come back in a year, in 5 years, 20 years, maybe 1,000 years. I'm saying, there's no way it's going to be 1,000 years. Absolutely no way. And by the way, I'm not talking about the end of the earth. We still have 1,000 years of millennium we've got to get through. We still have 7 years of tribulation we've got to get through. So I'm not talking about the end of the world. I am talking about the second coming of Jesus Christ. And according to where we want to place the rapture, some of this we'll get to see, some of it we may not. But some of this that I'm talking about has already been fulfilled. He said he would disperse them. They were dispersed. You may not remember it, but pick up the history books and read. Listen, in the religious world, and maybe in some seminaries. I know my training took up part of it, but the time from the book of Acts, the day of Pentecost, up to Constantine, and on past Constantine, maybe as far as 395 A.D., was considered the period of the age of purity, that the church knew their place. Persecution, yes. The state knew their place. And the gospel flourished. But then after that, with basically wanting to make everyone become a Christian, and if you became a state official, you basically became a church official. And for the next 1,200 years, it's viewed as the age of apostasy. And in that is time of your inquisitions, and the Jewish people were absolutely murdered. They were not only Jewish people, but even Christian people. You had your holy wars. You had all of this during this age of apostasy. So we've seen that not only were the Jews dispersed to four corners of the earth, but they were also persecuted then, and then even in this 1,200 years, and then even outside the 1,200 years, because we read about what happened during the Holocaust. And even some forms of persecution today, and I'll touch on that a little more as we go. But not only the persecution, but then the Lord said after the dispersion, the land would become desolate. It's not always been desolate. Not just Israel. Talk to Harry and let him tell you about how it used to look in Lebanon and how it looks now. It's the same in Israel that in Leviticus chapter 28. And again, I'm going to try to make sure I read these. Or 26, verse 33. And I will scatter you among the heathen, and will draw out a sword after you, and your land shall be desolate, and your cities a waste. This is in Leviticus, again, the first 5 books of the Torah. And we've seen that happen. That it became a land of desolate and city of waste. Read about it prior, especially prior to 1967. And you may have to look a little again, maybe before 1947, 1948. And you may even have to go even before 1917. And I'm going to cover every one of those dates for you. But you'll see how Israel looked and how the land was even eroded. Because of how they harvested the trees and then went and plant back, and it became a desolate and waste land. But God had declared that it would become desolate. And out of those three have happened. Well, the fourth one is also in the process of happening. I struggled if I put it in the ones that have happened in the past or that are happening now. So this one could go either way, is the preservation. In Isaiah chapter 66, verse 22, the Bible says, For as the new heavens and new earth which I shall make shall remain before me, that saith the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain. Even in Isaiah chapter 49, Isaiah even writes it out and almost makes fun. He said, even a mother with a brand new child, and I'm thinking of Jonathan and Christy, sorry. At least didn't forget Jonathan. And I'm thinking about baby Max there. I don't care. I could take that baby, and I don't care if I took that baby and hid that baby from them for 50 years. They would never forget that baby. Ever. Well, in here Isaiah said, it's like a mother with the child. That could she ever forget that baby's name? He said, she might forget it, but I will never forget you. And he goes on in the next verse and say, I have even inscribed your names in the palms of my hands. So see, the Lord also made a promise that He would preserve the nation of Israel. And by the way, there's 2 groups, and only 2 groups that I can find in the Bible that the Lord has made a promise to always preserve them, to always be a remnant. And one is Israel, and the other one is the church. He said that the gates of hell shall never prevail against the church. So we fall in, not to the Jewish part, but we fall into the church part. That we would always be promised that He would preserve them. And in 70 A.D., when the Romans came in, they destroyed the city of Jerusalem, and they took the Jewish nation captivity. They made it desolate, the land, and they scattered the Jewish people all across the earth. You can read this in the book of Josephus, probably the book of Wars. This is historical events that that's happened, has been fulfilled, and it's right in our history books just waiting for us to realize. And now the Lord is giving us the spiritual understanding to see that we are the generation to see the Lord come back. He preserved the Jews. But He not only preserved them, but when we read in Isaiah, and some of these I failed to write down all of my scriptures, and you can see I've got several pages. In Isaiah chapter 11, the Bible says, in that day there shall be a root of Jesse, which shall stand for an ensign of the people. To it shall the Gentiles seek, and his rest shall be glorious. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set His hand again the second time to recover to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left in Assyria. Using Sunday school, we talked about that. From Egypt, from Pathros, from Cush to Elam and Shinar, from Hamath and from the islands of the sea. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together dispersed from Judah from the four corners of the earth. So the Lord, and there's other passages, the Lord made a promise that I would regather my people at the appointed time. And the Lord has done that. In World War I, and being from this area, we kind of like to read about World War I because we have a local hero from World War I, Alvin C. York. And I thought it was just amazing to watch Moses look at that statue of Alvin C. York at the Capitol, knowing he was from Fentress County. It was quite amazing to watch how Moses was taken by that. And I mean Moses from India. And during World War I, this area of land in the Middle East was on what some people called it the Turkish Empire. And being Turkey, we know that they were no friend of Israel. Now we know that it's the proper name is the Ottoman Empire. And they controlled this entire land. And I don't know if some kind of deal was struck between them and Britain to keep them out of the World War I. I'm not sure. I've read some different things about that, but that's not that important. But all I know, we went from an empire, being the Ottoman Empire, that hated the Jewish people, to an empire called the British, who welcomed the Jewish people to come back home. You can read this in the Balfour Declaration of 1917. And it's prophecy right in front of us being fulfilled. And as important as that was, there still was some major prophecies that had to be seen before we could ever make the statement that we are the generation, the fig tree generation. And in a few moments I'll speak briefly about the fig tree generation. And if you'll understand in Judges chapter 9, not only the spiritual aspect, but also the symbolism of Judges chapter 9, when they are speaking about the different trees, three in particular. We understand it that they're going to have someone to rule over them. They kept going back to the bramble tree. Well, from a symbolism, the fig tree generation, that and other scriptures to let you know that the Jews are the fig tree generation, because this branch, the fig tree, represented their national privileges. And that's very important to note, because Jesus will talk about the fig tree generation. But he not only talks about it, but he talks about it in connection with some prophecies in the Old Testament. By the way, in case I forget to say, this nonsense about we not needing the Old Testament, all of these prophecies have been fulfilled in the last 2,000 years, and the majority of those prophecies are spoken about in the Old Testament. You better believe we need the Old Testament just as much as we need the new. So the Lord had promised a regathering. So we see that during World War I, things was put into place for Israel to be able to come back to a friendly place. But yet, they still wasn't coming the way they should have. So by the time we get to World War II and this Nazi Holocaust against mostly the Jewish people, and the atrocity of what went on, what happened because of that, they started leaving the four corners of the earth and going home. Just a year or two ago, when they had that bombing in Europe, and I think it may have been Paris, and Benjamin Netanyahu came on the news media, and he started pleading with all Jewish people, come home. This is the only place you're going to be safe.
I don't have much to bring. My heart is torn in pieces. It's my offering. Lay me at the throne. Leave me there alone to gaze upon your glory and sing to you this song. Please take me to the King. Truth is, it's time to stop playing these games. We need a word for the people's pain. So Lord, speak right now. Let it fall like rain. We're desperate. We're chasing after you. No rules, no religion. I've made my decision to run to you, the healer that I need. Take me to the King. I don't have much to bring. My heart is torn in pieces. It's my offering. Lay me at the throne. Leave me there alone to gaze upon your glory and to sing to you this song.
Take me to the
Lord, we're in the way. We keep making mistakes. Glory's not for us, it's all for you. So take me to the King. I don't have much to bring. My heart, it's torn to pieces. It's my offering.
Lay me at the throne.
Lay me at the throne.